Before we move forward, please like, share, and subscribe Strategic Vanguard and be up to date with the latest news and happenings from the world of defense, strategic, and international affairs. Tune into our video channels in YouTube and Rumble. And if you want to hear the audio version, tune into our Strategic Vanguard channels in Spotify and Amazon Music.
Okay, let's try a thought experiment. Picture this. It's just after independence, India is new. But what if? What if, instead of going it alone, non-aligned, what if India decided right then to join NATO, to actually side with the West?
Wow, yeah, that's a huge what if, a fundamental shift.
Right. Joining Washington, London, Paris, it completely changes the picture.
It really, really does.
So that's what we're digging into today. Not just a fun hypothetical, but really trying to understand how that one choice back then,
in the late 40s, maybe early 50s.
Exactly. How it could have just rippled outwards, affecting India's wars, Pakistan's place, China's rise. I mean, the whole Cold War dynamic itself.
Well, to really get it, you need the backdrop, right? NATO forms in 1949, and its purpose was crystal clear, contain the Soviet Union. That was the whole point.
Okay.
And at that exact same moment, India's just found its feet, just independent. And Prime Minister Nehru, he was absolutely committed to non-alignment. Famously so.
And his reasoning was pretty solid, wasn't it? From his perspective, anyway.
Oh,
he wanted India to carve out its own path. Strategic autonomy, they called it.
Mm-hmm.
There was this genuine worry about getting sucked into conflicts, Cold War stuff happening miles away.
Right.
That had nothing to do with South Asia's actual problems.
Absolutely. Why get entangled in Europe's battles or East Asia's?
So our deep dive today is really about exploring those forks in the road. The impact of making that kind of fundamental strategic bet. We'll look at, the military stuff, the strategic shifts, obviously.
Right.
But also the huge regional shakeups, China and Pakistan especially, and then the long-term picture economics, India's role in the world.
Exactly. And the first place you see a massive change is military and strategic. It's immediate. Yeah. If India joins NATO early on, well, its armed forces probably look completely different much sooner.
How so?
Think equipment. Modernization, decades ahead of schedule. Instead of, say, the Soviet MiG-21s that became iconic for the Indian Air Force, you might be seeing American F-16s or maybe top-tier British jets flying much, much earlier.
Wow. That alone is huge. But it's more than just the planes, isn't it?
Oh, much more. Think about NATO's collective security guarantees. The nuclear umbrella.
Meaning protection under the U.S., U.K., French nuclear deterrent.
Precisely. And access to NATO's intelligence networks, sharing intel methods. That's a massive capability boost. Overnight, practically.
Okay, so India's defense posture is transformed. What about the region, the Indian Ocean, for instance?
That could become essentially a NATO-controlled zone, much more strongly than it ever was. Indian ports, naval bases, they could be integrated right into Western strategy against the Soviets, a key southern flank for NATO.
Okay, but every action has a reaction. What's the immediate blowback? Who's not happy about this?
Well, the biggest reaction undoubtedly comes from Moscow, the Soviet Union. In our history, they became India's closest, most reliable defense partner for decades.
Right, a very deep relationship.
In this alternate world, forget it. Instant hostility. There's absolutely no Indo-Soviet Friendship Treaty in 1971 that's off the table.
That treaty was crucial during the Bangladesh War.
Crucial. And no steady supply of Soviet tanks, jets, ships, none of that long-term military hardware relationship. Decades later, you definitely don't see joint projects like the BrahMos missile.
So instead of partners, they're adversaries. What does Moscow do?
Well, the logical move for them, they'd likely start heavily arming India's main rival, Pakistan. Pouring weapons, maybe advisors, into Pakistan to counter NATO-allied India. That dramatically shifts the regional power balance. It makes South Asia potentially much, much more volatile.
Okay, so we have a NATO-backed India potentially facing a Soviet-backed Pakistan. Let's bring in the other giant neighbor, China. The 1962 border war was a really traumatic event for India, a big defeat.
Absolutely devastating, yes.
So the question is, in this alternate scenario with India under the NATO umbrella, does China even attack in 62? Is a NATO member too big a risk for Beijing?
That's a key question. It's possible the deterrence factor alone, knowing India had powerful allies, might have prevented the war entirely.
And if it did still happen?
Well, then you have the possibility of direct Western support for India. We're talking potentially American or British air power, advanced weapons systems rushed in, maybe even advisors or troops, though that's a bigger step.
Could that have changed the outcome on the ground?
It certainly could have. A very different war than the one India fought largely alone in our timeline. And thinking bigger picture, maybe this leads to a more cautious China on its southern border throughout that period. It might influence their broader strategic calculations.
Okay, let's shift focus again to Pakistan. This is fascinating because their history is almost the inverse. In our timeline, Pakistan was the U.S. ally in the region during the Cold War, right? They joined those pacts, CENTO, CETO.
Exactly. The Central Treaty Organization and the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, basically anti-Soviet alliances. And that membership gave Pakistan access to American weapons, military training, significant economic aid. It was a cornerstone of their foreign policy.
But if India is the NATO member,
Yeah.
the primary U.S. ally in South Asia, what happens to Pakistan?
That's where it gets really interesting. The U.S. likely wouldn't have needed, or perhaps even wanted, a separate alliance with Pakistan if India was firmly in the Western camp.
So Pakistan gets sidelined by Washington.
Potentially, yes. Or at least the relationship would be very different. Maybe they don't receive the same level or type of support. Think about the 1971 war again. Would the U.S. have tilted towards Pakistan, sending the 7th Fleet, if India was a fellow NATO ally? Probably not.
Right.
So you could see a scenario where India becomes Washington's key strategic partner in South Asia decades earlier than we actually saw the current Indo-U.S. partnership develop.
Which forces Pakistan to look elsewhere for support.
Very likely. Perhaps leaning more heavily on China, and maybe much earlier than in our timeline, it completely rewires the regional alignments.
Okay, let's pull back and look at the longer view. Beyond the immediate military and regional shifts, what about the long-term impact on India itself? Let's start with the economy.
This is another area where things could look radically different. Being closely aligned with the West, especially the U.S., might have pushed India towards economic liberalization much, much earlier.
Instead of the sort of state-controlled, inward-looking economy India had for decades.
Exactly. You might not have seen the long period of slower growth, sometimes called the Hindu rate of growth, from the 50s through the 70s, even into the 80s.
So potentially faster integration into the global economy. More trade, more foreign investment, much sooner.
It's highly plausible India could have become an economic powerhouse significantly earlier under that kind of Western influence and integration, avoiding decades of, well, relative stagnation.
There's always a trade-off, isn't there? What's the potential downside of this path?
The big one is strategic autonomy, foreign policy independence. NATO membership isn't just about benefits. It comes with obligations. Article 5, collective defense. You're part of a bloc.
Meaning India gives up some freedom to act unilaterally.
It has to. Collective action is the core principle. And think about India's historical role. A leader of the non-aligned movement. A prominent voice for the global South, for developing nations trying to chart their own course between the superpowers.
That whole identity just wouldn't exist.
It couldn't, really. If you're a NATO member, you're aligned. You're part of the Western bloc. So that unique position India carved out for itself, that ability to engage with both sides, to be seen as independent, that's likely gone.
So it's a stark choice. In this alternate world, maybe India is militarily stronger, maybe economically richer,
Yes,
sooner.
Essentially.
But it's absorbed into a bloc, less independent diplomatically, maybe not seen as that unique balancing power that it's increasingly viewed as today in our multipolar world.
That's the core dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it really highlights that fundamental trade-off, the potential gains in hard power, military muscle, economic growth by joining NATO early on. Very appealing in some ways, versus the loss of that strategic independence, that unique global voice, and the ability to navigate between power centers, which many feel has served India very well, especially now.
Absolutely. And it really forces us back to that central question. Was Nehru's original path, his gamble on non-alignment, despite the struggles and perhaps the slower economic start, was that ultimately the smarter play for India's long-term journey, for its unique place in the world today?
It's a tough one to answer definitively.
No easy answer at all. Hindsight is tricky.
Definitely. So let's leave you, the listener, with that question. What do you think? Would an India integrated into the Western alliance from the start have been better off? Or is the path it actually took, the path of strategic independence, ultimately more advantageous? Something to ponder how these huge historical choices echo down the decades, not just for one country, but for the entire global balance.
Before we move forward, please like, share, and subscribe Strategic Vanguard and be up to date with the latest news and happenings from the world of defense, strategic, and international affairs. tune into our video channels in YouTube and Rumble. And if you want to hear the audio version, tune into our Strategic Vanguard channels in Spotify and Amazon Music.